President Trump is now threatening 100% tariffs on Canada if the country solidifies a trade deal with China. To band together and survive in this new era, he also called the use of tariffs coercion.
A trade agreement that was initially praised by former U.S. President Donald Trump has suddenly become the source of an unprecedented threat. The Canada-China trade deal, negotiated to protect Canadian farmers and businesses, triggered a declaration from Trump threatening 100% tariffs on all Canadian goods entering the United States. The abrupt reversal highlights a deeper tension: Canadian economic independence and the shifting landscape of global trade. Before we dive into the details, make sure to like this video and subscribe for in-depth coverage of global economic developments and international trade strategies. The deal, finalized in Beijing on January 16, 2026, addressed long-standing trade barriers between Canada and China. Canadian farmers had been heavily affected by Chinese tariffs imposed in retaliation to earlier Canadian measures. In 2024, Canada followed U.S. policy by imposing 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. China responded in March 2025 with 100% tariffs on Canadian canola, peas, and other agricultural goods, plus additional duties on pork, seafood, and canola seeds. These tariffs caused significant disruptions in Canadian exports, particularly for provinces such as Saskatchewan, which produces over half of Canada's canola, and Atlantic Canada, where lobster and crab fisheries suffered devastating losses. The agreement with China sought to resolve these issues. Canada agreed to allow up to 49,000 Chinese electric vehicles into the domestic market annually at a reduced tariff of 6.1%, down from 100%. Simultaneously, China agreed to lower tariffs on Canadian canola seed to roughly 15%, while eliminating anti-dumping tariffs on canola meal, lobsters, crabs, and peas until at least the end of 2026. The deal immediately unlocked nearly $3 billion in export orders for Canadian producers and represented a carefully negotiated compromise addressing the concerns of both nations. Initially, the deal received praise from Trump, who described it as a positive development for Canadian diplomacy. However, the situation dramatically changed 8 days later during the World Economic Forum in Davos. Canada's Governor Mark Carney delivered a speech highlighting the need for middle powers to pursue strategic autonomy. He emphasized that global economic integration was being weaponized by great powers, using tariffs, financial infrastructure, and supply chains as tools of coercion. Without naming any country directly, Carney stressed that nations like Canada must diversify trade partnerships, reduce dependence on a single market, and protect economic sovereignty. This speech marked a turning point. Shortly afterward, Trump shifted his stance completely, publicly threatening Canada with 100% tariffs on all goods entering the United States. The rationale presented in these statements was not about the specifics of the Canada-China trade deal, but about Canadian independence. By engaging China on its own terms and asserting economic sovereignty, Canada demonstrated that American leverage over trade was not absolute. The threats, while dramatic, highlight several key realities. First, the Canada-China trade deal is already in effect and addresses domestic markets, not re-exportation to the U.S. Second. Imposing a 100% tariff on all Canadian goods would have catastrophic consequences for both economies. Canada exported $352 billion in goods to the U.S. in 2024, including lumber, aluminum, steel, energy resources, and automotive parts. Doubling costs overnight would not only devastate Canadian industries, but also disrupt American supply chains and consumer markets. Third, such a move would violate the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which specifically prevents arbitrary tariff impositions, creating potential legal challenges. The situation exposes the deeper strategic concern. For decades, Canada routed the majority of its trade through the United States, creating reliance that gave Washington substantial leverage. Carney's initiatives, negotiating with China, establishing partnerships with Qatar for LNG, strengthening ties with Europe for critical minerals, and developing transportation infrastructure that bypasses U.S. ports, are systematically reducing Canadian dependence on the U.S. market. Each alternative trade partnership and supply chain diversification weakens potential coercion, ensuring Canada can maintain economic resilience even in the face of U.S. pressure. Trump's reaction, including threats and punitive rhetoric, underscores the challenge of relinquishing influence over a historically dependent partner. The shift in posture from praise to threat demonstrates a concern over sovereignty, not trade specifics. Canada's growing economic independence exemplifies the strategic autonomy Carney outlined in Davos. Middle powers can protect themselves from coercion by diversifying partnerships, investing in domestic strength, and engaging with global partners pragmatically. By maintaining the agreement, Canada not only secures access to vital export markets, but also reinforces its credibility as a reliable and strategic trading partner on the global stage. At the same time, Carney and Canadian officials are actively pursuing a broader network of diversified partnerships, including strengthened ties with the European Union, Qatar, India, and other middle powers. These efforts are aimed at insulating the Canadian economy from potential coercion by any single nation and creating a web of alternative supply chains and markets that enhances resilience. This careful, multi-pronged strategy demonstrates that strategic autonomy is far from theoretical. Through proactive diplomacy, targeted trade agreements, and investments in infrastructure that bypass traditional choke points, Canada is showing the world that economic independence can be achieved without sacrificing growth or stability. The ability to negotiate on equal footing, protect domestic industries, and simultaneously expand global influence reflects a new model for middle powers navigating an increasingly unpredictable international environment. The broader lesson emerging from this episode is unmistakable. Middle powers are increasingly unwilling to rely exclusively on historical alliances or dominant global players to ensure economic security. By asserting independence in trade negotiations, resource management, and diplomatic engagement, nations like Canada can reduce vulnerability, safeguard critical industries, and project influence on a global scale. Trump's dramatic 100% tariff threat, rather than derailing Canada's strategy, inadvertently highlights its necessity. Each act of coercion reinforces the importance of diversification and self-reliance, validating the choices made by Canadian policymakers. Ultimately, Canada's approach underscores a fundamental shift in global economic dynamics. Strategic autonomy, once viewed as an aspirational concept, is now a practical requirement for nations seeking to maintain sovereignty over their economic and political decisions. By navigating threats, building alternative markets, and strengthening domestic capabilities, Canada is demonstrating that middle powers can thrive even when faced with the pressures of larger, more dominant countries. The country's measured response not only protects its immediate economic interests, but also positions it as a model for how nations can balance independence, diplomacy, and global engagement in an era where economic coercion is increasingly used as a tool of statecraft. In conclusion, the Canada-China trade agreement illustrates a shift in global dynamics. What began as standard trade diplomacy became a symbol of Canadian autonomy when met with threats of U.S. retaliation. The 100% tariff warning highlights both the fragility of traditional dependencies and the growing importance of strategic diversification for middle powers. By negotiating effectively, Canada has secured tangible benefits for farmers, expanded trade options, and signaled to the world that economic independence is both possible and necessary. If you found this analysis insightful, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to stay updated on major trade developments, international strategies, and economic shifts that shape the global landscape.